going to do the solution for the distance table calculation exercise. So let's see. So I think you got the project created already from last week. So let's go to that project there. So it should be week number 5. And then there should be a class called calculate mileages of itineraries. Okay. So let me just briefly recap what we did last time. So we actually declare constants. Each one of them corresponds to a particular city in the table. So we got Chicago corresponds to 0, Boston corresponds to 1. So these numbers are intended to be used as the indices into the two-dimensional array. So that's why we define the constants. So your code can be much more readable when you actually index into the two-dimensional array. And we also define the distance table over here. So you can see over here, so this is row number 0. This is row number 1, and etc. Row number 2, row number 3, and row number 0 is all the distances from Chicago. So you can see if you didn't actually have the haven't defined a constant over here, it'll be rather difficult to convert them to the table. So that's why we did the constant declarations. And then we make the assumption that the user is not going to enter more than 20 cities in a row. So that's something we can safely assume. And then when we read from the user, we're going to store one by one the string name of the city. So that's why we declare an array called cities of size maximum size. So maximum size might change as we change the assumption. Maybe 20, maybe 30, maybe 40, doesn't matter. Now we also got the counter over here to keep track of how many names we have read so far. Initially 0. Every time we read a new name, store that into the cities array, we're going to increment the counter by 1. So the next time, we can store in the right position, in the right neighbor. And we also declare a Boolean variable here to say if the user wants to enter more names, we're going to use that to control if we should exit from the loop. Right? That's we have done that many times already. For each time, we're going to prompt the user for the name of a city, and then that's why we are reading a line from the user rather than integer. And then, so these two lines are most critical to say we're going to use the current value of the counter to store into the array. And then after we have stored the city name into the array, we're going to increment the counter. So that corresponds to the right neighbor of the current position, right? So that's something you should really know. I think you need that for the lab test as well. And then at the end of each iteration, we're going to ask the user, would you like to enter another city? And they're going to enter either Y or N. So basically anything other than Y is going to be considered as a no. That's just what we have been doing. Okay, and then what we did last time was simply just to go over the array. So you can see the upper bound has been set to how many names entered so far rather than the length of the array. So you should really know the reason for that. Okay, and we said before, you simply cannot just use the names directly to index into the array. You have to somehow convert the city name, for example, from Chicago into number 0, from Boston into number 1, etc. Okay, that's why we were doing such conversion here. So today I'm actually going to show you the simplest solution for you, okay, to actually see how you can calculate the distance. Okay. So the idea is, let me just give you one example here. Let's say if the user so far has entered 3 cities. So we got 0, 1, 2, all the way to 19. So size 20. So let's say this one, let's say the first did Chicago, and then Boston, and then Miami. Apparently, you simply cannot do the following. You simply cannot say distance Chicago and then Boston. So this will not compile because these are string values rather than integer values. So what we need to do instead is somehow to figure out what's the corresponding integer values for each of the string names, if they exist. So the easiest solution I can think of would be the following. So let's say this is the cities array. Okay, we can simply just do another array, which is going to convert from each city name into the corresponding integer. And then we're going to use that array particularly. So we can call that maybe indices. So it's going to be, since we have read 3 cities, so the size of this new array will be of size 3. Okay, so 0, 1, and 2. So now, for Chicago, we're going to figure out what should be the corresponding index for that. For Chicago, it should be 0. For Boston, it should be, I don't know, 1. And for Miami, whatever, it may be 4. Doesn't matter. Okay. And once we figure out for each city its index value, and then we can use this array here to look up into the 2-dimensional array. Okay, that's kind of the idea. Let's see how we can do this. Okay, so now let me do that. So can we just so this part is not. Let me just do this. So we can actually change this for loop. So let me just do it from scratch. Okay, so this part here is not necessary anymore. So I'm going to start a new loop to show you how you can do it. Okay, so basically we'd say create a new array that stores the corresponding indices of each city name. Okay, that's what we'll do. So now, let's create an array first. So integer array, let's call that indices, and new integer array. And the size of that depends on how many names we have read so far. Okay, so if so far we have read 3 names, then this array will be of size 3. If we have read 5 names, so this array will be of size 5. Okay. So now, let's see how we can convert that. So now we're going to go over the cities array and convert from each string into an integer. So integer I equals 0, I less than how many names entered so far, and I plus plus. Okay, just a normal way of iterating through the array. And now we're going to do the if statements, which we did last time. Okay, only once. So you say if, let me do a little bit better for you. So let's say string name is assigned to, so cities array at index I. Okay, so the first one is going to be Chicago, and the second one is going to be Boston, and then Miami, etc. Right? So we're gonna do to say if the name dot equals Chicago. In this case, we're going to store the Chicago index into the indices array. Okay, so we're gonna say indices at position I is assigned to Chicago. Okay, I'll stop here for a moment, so please make sure you understand up to now. It's quite critical. So basically, we're creating a new array of integers. So we're actually going to convert from each slot in the cities array from its string value into the corresponding integer value. Because Chicago has its corresponding index according to the constant over there, right? So we're going to convert from string into integer. And later on, once we are done with this array, we can simply use that to actually look up the distance in the distance table. Okay. Yeah, if you have questions, you can interrupt me at any points. So now we're going to do the rest of the cities over there. So I'm just going to copy this part so it's easier for me. So we have also Boston. So you'd say else if name. Actually, let me be a little bit lazy here. You can copy this part here. Okay, I just need else if. Okay. So we got 7 cities in total. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So after Chicago, we got Boston. Boston, Boston. And then we got New York. New York, New York. And then we got Atlanta. And that should be Atlanta. And we got Miami. And here, that should be Miami. And then we got Dallas. And then we got Houston. Okay. Otherwise, if the city name is simply not defined, we can actually do indices I is equal to -1 because we don't have such constant. Just say -1. We'll handle the error in a moment, but let's just do the normal calculation first. Okay. Okay, so basically this for loop here, we simply just go through the cities array elements one by one from left to right, and then convert each city name into the corresponding integer index. Okay, that's what we will do. So in this particular example here, Chicago is going to be converted to 0. Boston is going to be converted to 1. And then Miami is going to be converted to 4. Okay, so that's the integer array we're talking about. And so now whenever we actually got this else branch executed, that means we have one name at least that is not defined. Okay, so what we can do is before this for loop here, we can have something like that. So Boolean, all names are defined. Okay, so let's say initially that's true. Okay, so now we can include that in our state condition here, so we might have some early exit. If all the names are defined, then we're going to stay in the loop. Otherwise, as soon as we find out there is one name that is not defined, we're going to exit from the loop. Okay, so all names are defined. So this pattern, actually, we have seen that for many examples already. So you set it to true. Okay, when you have to set the index to -1. Okay, so only those 7 cities in the table are defined. Anything else will be considered as non-existing. Okay. Any question up to now? Okay. So now we're going to do the following to say, well, if all the names are defined, which means after this for loop here, okay, let me say this. After this for loop, if all names are defined, remains true. It means that all the cities are defined. Okay, that's what we have. So I don't know why it actually gives me some this error. 1 second to actually. I'll just use the normal comments. Okay. Okay. So now, depending on this, if this variable is true or not, let's say if it is true. So now we can actually use this indices array to actually calculate the distances, right? To actually sum them up. So now you can say, first of all, integer total distance. Okay, initially let's say that's 0. Okay, that's like really like calculating the summation of the array, like the average. So now we'd say for again integer I equals 0, I less than indices. So now we are really using this array over here. The length I plus plus. Okay, so now we are going to, since all the names are defined, so we can safely use that to calculate the distance. Okay, so now let's do integer origin index equals total distance I, sorry, indices I, and also destination index is equal to indices I plus 1. Okay, and then we're going to use these two indices to actually look up what the distance should be between the two cities. So now we can say total distance plus equal, which means total distance is equal to total distance plus equal distance over here, origin index, and then destination index. Okay, any question so far? Any part you want me to explain again? So please feel free to say that. Yes, which part?
We copied the final in Boston to Houston. So where did you keep those in the script?
Which part? So which part are you talking about? Sure. Which part? Uh-huh. You mean here?
Oh, yeah. Thank you.
Oh, okay.
You copied that and put somewhere.
Oh, actually, it just it's a reminder. So in your if statement there, over there, just make sure you got Chicago, you got Boston, you got all the 7 cities. Yeah. Yes.
Well, I'll make sure that in the else part, shouldn't you make it false if it isn't one of the other ones?
You are absolutely right. It should be false. Absolutely. Yes. Thanks so much. Yes. Because we actually included this Boolean variable here as all the names are defined. Initially, that's true because we haven't found any undefined name. As soon as we find out the name is not defined, of course, we'll set it to false. Thank you. Yes, definitely. Okay, so now I have a question for you. You can see that for each I, we are trying to use I and I plus 1 to index into the array. So now my question is there any problem with this state condition here? So when you say I is strictly less than indices at length, so what's the maximum value that I can take? It would be indices at length minus 1, right? In that case, indices at length minus 1 and then plus 1 will give you indices at length, which is not a valid index into the array, right? So the idea is, let's say this is the if this is the indices array 0, 1, and 4, okay? When I is equal to 0, we actually say this is the origin index, that's the destination index, okay? When I is equal to 1, and we'll say this is the origin index, this is the destination index. And then in the next iteration, we're going to increment that to 2. In this case, this will be the origin index, and what about the destination index as I plus 1? So we go 1 off the array, right? So now that means the maximum value we can take for this loop here is wrong. So we shouldn't say I is strictly less than indices length. The maximum value you can take should be this value here instead, rather than this one. Okay, so how do we fix that? So you can either say, so there are 2 ways to fix this. Either you can say that's strictly less than this, because of the plus 1 over here, or you can say that's less than or equal to this minus 2. Okay, either way. So I might just put this. Okay, that's something you should really also think it through by yourself. Okay, so the reason we are changing the state condition here is because we're using I and I plus 1. So it's very similar. Remember in your quiz, you want to figure out if it's the array is sorted, or the right neighbor is exactly 1 larger than the left neighbor, right? In that case, you got to check I and I plus 1. Since you're using I plus 1, so you want to make sure I never takes the value length minus 1, right? That's something you want to understand. Okay, all is well, and now, otherwise, so this is the part where all the names are defined. Okay, the else part is not the case. All the names are defined, right? Okay, we also got a report which name it is, the very first name we found. Okay, let's just add a few more lines of code and then we're done. Okay, so let's say string undefined city, like that. Okay. Let me say just empty string to begin with. Okay. So now in this case over here, this is a case where we found that undefined city. So now we can say undefined city is assigned to cities I, or just name, because that name simply does not match any of the 7 cities that's defined in the table. Okay, so that means the undefined city is going to remain empty string if we can find out what that name matches to. Otherwise, it will be set to this name over here because it cannot match any one of them. Okay, so now if in the case of error, we're going to say system.out.println. We're going to say, well, undefined city, and then undefined city, like that. We're going to see one example. I'm going to run it for you. Okay, after this, so in the case of if, then we can report what the total distance is. System.out.println. Total distance is plus total distance. Okay, of course, here you can also write a code. Print out. I'll leave that as an exercise for you. Exercise, print out the city names. For example, you may have Chicago, Boston, and then Miami. Okay, that's something you can do. You can simply just run through the city's name and then to print them out one by one. Okay, I'll leave them to you. Okay, let's have a look at the output. Okay, let's do the normal case. Chicago, yes, another city. Boston, yes, and then Miami. Nope. Okay, total distance is this. Because you can see Chicago is defined, Boston is defined, Miami is also defined because each one of them corresponds to some valid integer index that we define as a constant. On the other hand, let me try another one. Let's say London, Chicago, and then that already tells me it's undefined. Let me try to see that. It shouldn't be this early actually. Sorry, let me have a look quickly. Yeah, I think. Give me one moment. I think just a small detail I missed. So once we are done, I think. So where's that while loop? Yeah, maybe let me try again. Maybe you're right. So let's say London over here, another city. I think you're right. So I was typing something like that. It was treated as a no. Okay. So London, yes, and then Chicago, yes. Boston. Let's say that. Let's say no. Okay. Undefined city is London. Okay, I think it's working. Yeah, I didn't pay attention to that. Okay, so let me just recap once more what we did today to complete the solution. So basically, the code we extended would say after the user types no to say they don't want to enter any more city. In that case, we're actually going to convert from whatever names they have entered so far, string names, and convert from each one of them into the corresponding integer index and create just another array. And then we're going to use this array here to look up the distances between two cities one by one. Okay? So that's what we did. And whenever we found that the current name we are looking at does not really match, then we're going to store that name and report the error. And then also to set the Boolean variable to be false, so we can exit from the loop earlier. And then eventually, we're going to use the Boolean variable over here to say, well, if all the names are defined, we're going to calculate the distance using the indices array. Okay. Otherwise, we're going to report the error about the undefined city. Okay. It's not that many lines of code we have added, so please study that and then take that as a case study. Okay. So that might help you. I'm not sure. It's not really directly relevant to the lab test, but maybe later on in the midterm or in the final, I think the case study will be useful. Okay. Any questions before I move on to matrices? No questions? Okay. I'm going to make the video available so you can still follow that. If you got any questions, you can come to my office hour to talk to me.